let's highlight the key news in simple terms to understand Russia's war on Ukraine and the global events shaping this conflict. Subscribe to YouTube 24. In the video description, there is a link to my YouTube channel, where analytics are updated daily. Please like it, write in the comments where you are watching from, your comments, suggestions, questions. We need your feedback to promote Ukrainian language content and fight against Russian propaganda. Today we will discuss how the calls around the meeting between Whitaker and Vladimir Putin took place, why Donald Trump proposed the exchange of territories, and how Europeans perceived it. First, they were told one thing, then another, so their reactions were different. It is not yet known whether Volodymyr Zelenskyy will be present in Alaska during the meeting between Putin and Trump. The White House is working on organizing a trilateral meeting. This is important. Europe, together with Ukraine, is forming a common position to influence the processes between Moscow and Washington. Bloomberg reported that European leaders, including British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron, and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, are seeking a meeting with Donald Trump before his talks with Vladimir Putin. It is worth paying attention to the statement of Vice President J.D. Vance, as the media is spreading news about the possible termination of U.S. assistance to Ukraine. There are important nuances to consider. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte voiced key points that should also be focused on. Azerbaijan can supply Ukraine with weapons of strategic importance. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy may visit Alaska in mid-August. On the same days that U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are scheduled to meet, CNN, citing its own sources, reports that Volodymyr Zelenskyy is not officially mentioned among the possible participants in the August 15th event. The White House does not rule out his presence. One U.S. administration official noted that any meetings involving President Zelenskyy would likely take place after the Trump-Putin talks. According to the New York Post, a daily newspaper that reaches Donald Trump's desk in the Oval Office, the White House is working to organize a trilateral meeting between Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. The New York Post sources emphasize that peace agreements without Ukraine's participation will be meaningless. This is the primary demand of European leaders. European leaders are urging Washington to tighten sanctions against Moscow to influence the outcome of the meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, which could determine the fate of Ukraine. This was reported by the Financial Times. On the eve of the Alaska talks, European countries are forming a united front on the format and content of the meeting, as it could be a turning point in Russian aggression. Vladimir Putin acts only under pressure. The military pressure is not strong enough, and the U.S. sanctions have not yet been applied. Friedrich Merz, who had a telephone conversation with Donald Trump yesterday, said that the application of sanctions could have a significant impact on the Russian economy. He urged the U.S. president to take appropriate measures. Merz also noted that the meeting in Alaska should bring concrete results, including increased pressure on Russia or its realization that the war cannot continue. The newspaper reports that European officials insist that any future ceasefire agreement must be accompanied by tough sanctions in case of violations by Russia. NATO's Mark Rutte spoke about possible security guarantees in case a ceasefire is reached. According to the Wall Street Journal, 3 key calls took place after the meeting between Whitaker and Vladimir Putin in Moscow. On August 8th, Donald Trump was supposed to announce the introduction of customs restrictions or sanctions against the Kremlin, but instead announced a planned meeting in Alaska. First, Donald Trump called. Before and after the meeting, he spoke with European leaders and Volodymyr Zelenskyy. In the conversation, Trump said that Vladimir Putin might agree to withdraw from Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions, provided that Ukraine leaves Donetsk region. After these calls, Volodymyr Zelenskyy said that there were tangible steps and an understanding that Russia was supposedly ready for a ceasefire. Volodymyr Zelenskyy said that we need to be careful because Russia often deceives. On Thursday, Whitaker held an online conversation with representatives of European countries on national security issues and representatives of Ukraine. In this conversation, Whitaker said that Vladimir Putin does not intend to withdraw from Kherson, Donetsk, and Zaporizhzhia regions. European representatives became concerned about the discrepancies in the statements made by Donald Trump and Whitaker. On Friday, they initiated another call with Whitaker, during which it became clear that Vladimir Putin's proposal was for Ukraine to leave the Donetsk region, after which Russia could cease fire, but without any guarantees. This is a significant difference from Trump's initial offer and Whitaker's last statement 3 calls later. The Wall Street Journal reports that it was the contradictory statements that triggered the alarm bells. Europe has intensified its work as each side voices different positions. Back in June 2024, Vladimir Putin said that he was ready to cease fire if Ukraine left Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson regions. There is no point in discussing it because the situation is already clear. Donald Trump did not impose sanctions. A meeting was agreed upon. Vladimir Putin requested talks with Whitaker, and then the process intensified. In fact, Putin partially dragged Trump into the negotiation scenario, instead of imposing tariffs, duties, and sanctions. Another meeting took place which could lead to compromises unacceptable to Ukraine and European countries. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who had previously promoted a bill on tariffs on Russia, changed his position. In an interview with NBC News, he said that a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia would include certain exchanges of territory. According to him, Ukraine cannot expel every Russian, and Russia cannot capture Kyiv, so eventually there will be territorial exchanges. Lindsey Graham said territorial exchanges can only occur after Ukraine gets security guarantees to prevent another invasion, citing Crimea's annexation and the 2022 invasion. He didn't mention sanctions but spoke of possible exchanges without specifying territories. Russia cannot offer an exchange of territories that belong to Ukraine, as all of the regions in question are Ukrainian. If we are talking about Ukraine's withdrawal from some of its territories in exchange for Russia's withdrawal from other Ukrainian territories, this is not a real exchange. Lindsey Graham also said that a ceasefire is possible only if security guarantees are provided, but did not specify who should provide these guarantees and how. Mark Rutte said that coordinated actions by NATO member states to supply weapons to Ukraine will continue regardless of the outcome of the meeting between President Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin. This was reported by Clash Report. Secretary General Rutte emphasized that NATO will provide Ukraine with everything it needs to fight and be in the best possible position at the time of negotiations on a ceasefire or peace agreement. Mark Rutte said Trump will test Putin in Alaska, but no final Ukraine deal is expected. He said, Trump will see how serious Putin is, and stressed the importance of the meeting, even without final decisions. Mark Rutte said no final agreement is expected, but NATO will keep supplying Ukraine with US-purchased weapons. Vice President J.D. Vance criticized Ukraine, but said the US won't oppose European and NATO arms sales to Ukraine.
JD Vance, де він дуже багато неприємно сказав про Україну, але він сказав, якщо європейці і країни НАТО хочуть купувати зброю для України, то ок, ми не проти.
Regardless of the agreements between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, even if they are unacceptable to Ukraine, the supply of arms will continue. This was stated by NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and Vice President J.D. Vance. In this interview, Mark Rutte also voiced important points that we should focus on. Mark Rutte said that Vladimir Putin remains the main threat to the North Atlantic Alliance. He also noted that the positions of the United States, Ukraine, and Europe coincide. Regarding the supply of weapons, Rutte confirmed that it will continue. The most important issue is security guarantees. Rutte emphasized that the first key point is territories, and recognized that Russia currently controls part of Ukrainian territory. The question is how to move forward after the ceasefire and what it will mean for Ukraine's security guarantees. Mark Rutte explained that if the future agreement includes provisions on the occupier's control over some Ukrainian territories, it should only be a de facto recognition, not a legal one. From 1940 to 1991, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania had embassies in Washington, D.C., which meant de facto recognition of the Soviet Union's control over their territories, but not legal agreement with this fact. This is an example of how the presence of diplomatic missions did not affect the sovereignty of the Baltic states, which had been under Soviet oppression for decades. Mark Rutte proposed a model of de facto occupation without legal recognition, which looks like an attempt at a compromise. Regarding security guarantees, he said a ceasefire must come first. Then, under Macron and Starmer, Europe will work with the US and NATO to discuss how to provide security guarantees. This is not working. This was already the case in the form of the Budapest Memorandum, where the parties were supposed to sit down and discuss assistance to Ukraine in the event of aggression. Ukraine needs clear security guarantees before or simultaneously with the ceasefire. The leadership insists on an unconditional ceasefire, after which negotiations with Russia can be held. It is unacceptable to sign long-term agreements without specific security guarantees that are only planned to be discussed later. In an interview with Fox News, J.D. Vance said that the United States is tired of financing Russia's conflict in Ukraine and is withdrawing support, shifting responsibility to Europe. If Europe wants to buy weapons, it has the opportunity to do so. J.D. Vance also said that Donald Trump told him that the meeting may not work, but it is worth a try. The U.S. will continue to use the president's diplomatic influence. J.D. Vance said that all Americans should be proud that the U.S. president is committed to bringing peace to the region. He also emphasized that the supply of weapons will continue, but the financing of the war will be stopped. The media, including leading online publications, reported that J.D. Vance said that the U.S. would stop funding Ukraine. The previous programs of the Joe Biden administration have already contracted arms deliveries until 2028, and these deliveries have been funded, and production is underway. They can't be cancelled, though some may be paused, like the Defense Ministry did at the border. Supplies will continue. The US, NATO, Netherlands, and Scandinavian countries have contracts totaling $1 billion. This issue remains relevant. Trump doesn't give aid for free, so Vance's claim about funding suspension is misleading since the US sells weapons, not gives direct funding. Notably, Vance's Fox News interview aired before his UK trip, but is being widely shared. In the UK, J.D. Vance met with Defense Secretary James Lemmy, Ukrainian officials Rustem Umerov and Andriy Yermak, and leaders from major European countries. After the meetings, it was announced that concrete steps and a common position were agreed upon. Zelensky said Ukraine's signals are heard and considered, with progress moving positively. The Express reported specific common positions were reached. J.D. Vance's controversial interview with Fox News was recorded before his trip to the UK, which is important to remember. Matthew Whitaker, the US representative to NATO, said that there could be no major land swaps because large swathes of territory would not be given away for nothing. This statement was widely covered in the media.
Ніяких великих обмінів території не може бути, тому що жодні великі шматки території не віддаватимуться просто так.
The media reported on the US statement about the impossibility of exchanging territories, which caused a reaction. This is partly manipulated, as Matthew Whitaker's full quote reads as follows. A journalist asked him about Donald Trump's words about a deal that includes the exchange of territories. Volodymyr Zelensky rejected the idea and said that Ukraine had no intention of giving away any land. Matthew Whitaker said, "The technical teams are negotiating, which is good news. They'll decide what land can be exchanged and if it's possible." He accepted Zelensky's stance that no land fought for by Ukraine can be given away and emphasized the war must end. Matthew Whitaker quoted Volodymyr Zelensky as saying, "I will return to the topic of negotiations." He called the fact that Donald Trump met with one of the parties or both inspiring. The media took his words out of context, claiming that Whitaker said it was impossible to exchange territories, which is not true. The Washington Post confirms that Vladimir Putin has no intention of withdrawing troops from the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions. Witkov's words, especially about Timofeyev, were misinterpreted. 3 calls took place, 1 with Trump, 2 with European reps. In the last, Witkov said Putin didn't plan to withdraw and wanted Donetsk, making a ceasefire without guarantees possible. This is the key point. Some sources say that Putin is convinced that he can break through the front within 2 or 3 months and that nothing will stop him. In conclusion, the topic of Azerbaijan is mentioned. The tense situation between Baku and Moscow began on December 25, 2024, when Russian forces shot down a civilian Azula aircraft. Russia has not yet recognized its responsibility, apologized, or provided compensation to Baku. Azerbaijan has filed a complaint with international institutions, and the Kremlin has said it will await their decision, although it has not previously complied with the rulings and verdicts of international judicial bodies. In recent weeks, Russian armed forces have been striking at Azerbaijan's energy facilities in Ukraine. 7 on August 8, Russian troops attacked SOCAR's oil depot in Odessa region with 5 Shahed drones. The attack caused a fire and damaged a diesel pipeline. Russian troops attacked a gas distribution station near Orlivka, a key element of the Trans-Balkan gas pipeline, through which Azerbaijani gas began flowing to Ukraine on June 28. The strikes targeted critical infrastructure connected to Azerbaijan. Sources say that if Russia continues its aggressive policy toward Azerbaijan's interests, official Baku will consider lifting the arms embargo on Ukraine from its arsenals. The farewell between Baku and Moscow can go far, which is beneficial for Ukraine. Yesterday, Volodymyr Zelensky and Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev spoke by phone after signing historic agreements at the White House under the auspices of Donald Trump. These are not peace agreements, but a step towards signing them. The key is that Russia is withdrawing from the South Caucasus. Azerbaijani media outlets report that Baku is considering the possibility of transferring weapons to Ukraine, including 120mm and 152mm caliber weapons. Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev has already announced the allocation of $2 million in humanitarian aid to Kyiv in the energy sector. Russian troops are actively attacking energy infrastructure. Relations between Baku and Moscow are significantly deteriorating.
Наступне, що загострюється дуже сильно відносини між Баку і Москвою.
Vladimir Solovyov, a Russian propagandist, said that a so-called special military operation could be launched in the South Caucasus. Andrei Gorulev, a member of the Russian State Duma, called for a complete ban on all Azerbaijani goods, arguing that Moscow would not suffer significant losses, while Baku would be hit hard. He also suggested striking at Azerbaijan's business in Russia. Andrei Gorulov said that Russia will find something to take away, and added that a special military operation could be launched along the entire border of the Russian Federation. Russia is openly threatening war against Azerbaijan, which is a strange initiative on the part of the Kremlin. Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service has discovered an analytical report by a Russian fund that predicts oil prices will fall to $40 to $50 per barrel in the coming months. World oil prices may fall to $40 to $50 per barrel in late 2025 and early 2026. This is stated in a report by the Russian foundation Roscongress. Currently, a barrel of oil costs about $65–68, but the market is experiencing a new price war. OPEC Plus has announced an increase in oil production. For the second time in 2025, Russia is reviewing budget revenues and amending the budget due to falling oil revenues. In July, Russians made 30% less profit than in the same period last year. Economic sanctions and duties are working. We need to put pressure on Donald Trump to impose duties not only on India, which is resisting, but also on other countries. Lars Lindgren, who has had a bill on this issue since April 4th, should be dealing with this issue, not discussing the exchange of territories as a condition for ending the war. We must apply economic pressure, Zelensky said in his latest address, to pressure Putin even if he won't end the war. We need to crush him economically.